particular, it's proposed to determine the value of the ruble, which should be backed by both gold and a group of goods that are currency values. I wonder if they could be referring to silver. Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics, and quite an interesting story. This came out a couple of days ago, thanks to Ronan the Destroyer Manly of BullionStar, and an escalation of not trade wars, sanctions, real wars, financial wars between the US and Russia, where we've seen a gold backing of sorts to varying degrees to the ruble. And again, at least to me, this is different than when Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi were talking about some sort of gold involvement or non-petrodollar resolution. This is now Russia and China, also a decade later, a lot of stress on the system. And now apparently it appears that things are heading to perhaps a more official resolution, potentially, if that helps. But Ronan Manly really lays it out quite clearly here. And hopefully we'll have Ronan on the show in the near future. Have been talking with him. I know he's been traveling a lot, but would be great to dig in. But fortunately, he wrote this down, and I'll go through a little bit with you here now. Because Kremlin confirms intention to back ruble with gold and commodities. On Tuesday, April 26th, in an interview with the Russian news paper Rossiyskaya Gazeta, the secretary of the Russian Federation Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev, said that Russian experts are working on a project to back the ruble with gold and other commodities. So at least the way it seemed to me is that I don't know if they knew exactly when military tensions were going to escalate, but it seems as if what we saw so far was a bit of a stopgap, yet perhaps the nation's decision makers and financial experts are now studying it to see what is our next move here, which is what we'll dig into. Ronan mentions here that for those who don't know who he is, one of the most powerful security intelligence officers, and his resume is there, so he's not just some guy. Is the basic takeaway from that. We won't go through his entire resume, but Security Council of the Russian Federation, chaired by Putin, with Patrushev as secretary, overseeing the Security Council and answering directly to Putin. So, as Ronan puts here, when he says that Russia is working on a plan to back the ruble with gold and commodities, it's not just anybody saying this, but coming from at least the type of folks that, and again, I don't know if this is an official decision. It sounds like they're studying that, although certainly, it's one of those outcomes. That's why I've been doing a show about silver manipulation, whether this is how it ultimately resolves or not. You see something there, you see where it's ultimately heading. And I'm glad I have some silver while they're discussing this. I mean, worst case, we go back to George Bush version of American free market economics, or should things progress, because they're working on a plan to back the ruble with gold and commodities. And we'll dig into some of the comments of what was said there. Fortunately, Ronan did an excellent job of highlighting many of said comments. And we'll dig into a few of those. What do we need to ensure the ruble's sovereignty? It's a means of payment, must have intrinsic value and price stability without being pegged to the dollar. Really the epitome of a lack of intrinsic value and price stability. And that's me as someone who grew up in New Jersey. So I think of myself at heart as an American. My father was from Egypt, so I don't know how that all shakes out, but just to the degree to which we'll get into whether any of these systems can't there be a system that's good for all people or something free or fair. And I guess the reason, if some people think I'm siding, I don't know if that's how I see it exactly yet. This makes more sense where anything that someone's proposing something pegged to an actual good that could create the intrinsic value and price stability without being pegged to the dollar that has been corrupted ever since it lost the backing, which Patrushev actually digs into, and we'll get to shortly enough. So now experts are working on a project proposed by the scientific community to create a two-circuit monetary and financial system. In particular, it's proposed to determine the value of the ruble, which should be backed by both gold and a group of goods that are currency values. I wonder if they could be referring to silver. I don't. That's my speculation. I don't know. It would seem that would be, maybe we could break 30, the silver price. So a group of goods that could conceivably, but does not necessarily include silver, that are currency values, and to put the ruble exchange rate in line with the real purchasing power parity. So at least on the surface, it's like it's Rocky 8, Patrushev versus Benham, underlings for the real government leaders. I mean, it's kind of like as I imagine, probably a similar tamp in the gold market around 2000. You've seen, for the same reasons that, I mean, we just happened to hear Ross talk about, and that's Ross Benham of the CFTC, talk about tamping down the silver price because they were concerned. I would speculate that there's a similar dynamic with the gold price, and we will see how this resolves. But I guess at least for people who have purchased gold or silver wondering about this sort of outcome, escalation, as Ronan says. So there you have it. Russian government actively working on creating a gold and commodity-backed ruble with intrinsic value outside the orbit of the US dollar. I mean, I've spent the last decade thinking of ways to get away from the US dollar as much as possible. Currently in Mexico, a lot of my income is from our sponsors, which are Canadian mining companies. So, and I think when people see these things, especially people who have businesses, you're seeing capital leave the US, not just me. And now, I mean, it's being discussed on a more significant level here. So, following the remarks, similar ideas have been voiced before. However, a number of experts say they contradict the conclusions of economic theory. To which he replies, they do not contradict the conclusions of economics, but rather the conclusions of the Western economics textbooks. The West has unilaterally appropriated an intellectual monopoly on the optimal structure of society and has been using it for decades. It reminds me of the 80s, 90s, especially the 2000s, post running from the dust cloud. And we're not opposed to a market economy and participation in global production, but we are clearly aware that the West allows other countries to be its partners only when it is profitable for it. Therefore, the most important condition for ensuring Russia's economic security is to rely on the country's internal potential. So again, just for people that don't like the George Bush, Hillary Clinton model that we've been going with, it seems like whether you subscribe to the Russian government's model, that at least another significant group with some purchasing power putting their 2 ounces behind the matter. So anyway, I'll put the link to the rest of this. It's a fantastic article. Perhaps you could comment real quickly the conclusion, because when they offered to buy gold from Russian banks at a fixed price of 5,000 rubles per gram last month, this was the first step in linking the ruble to gold. This also puts a floor under the ruble and acted as a catalyst for the ruble to re-strengthen ground against the US dollar that had been lost. And during the same week in late March, Putin also informed the global markets that non-friendly importers of Russian gas would have to pay for gas using rubles. So down here, confirming this simple equation of linking the Russian ruble to gold is the latest news. In other words, the beginning of a multilateral gold and commodity-backed monetary system, i.e. Bretton Woods 3, which Zero Hedge fans have heard Posner, I don't recall his first name, but the guy talking about that Bretton Woods 3. And fortunately, Ronan even provides the link because it's not easy to get this thing translated. And I'll read one couple parts here before we wrap up. Here he's saying the question: you have figuratively described the Anglo-American style of communication with the world as piracy. Now the West is making a similar pirate raid on Russia. And in this connection, the question arises to how justified was the decision to place gold and foreign exchange reserves abroad. And here he says the decision turned out to be unjustified from the point of view of the state's financial security. Another thing that by doing so, the West is hitting not only Russia, but also itself. The current global financial system is built solely on trust, including in the United States as the issuer of the world's reserve currency. Half a century ago, the gold factor was present, but in 1971, the United States untied its currency from its quotes, which made it possible to issue money virtually uncontrolled. And that certainly many of the folks who are into silver and gold investing are familiar with. Trying to support its economy in a constant pre-crisis state, the United States is actively pumping its banks, businesses, and the population with money secured by government obligations. The result was high rates of inflation in America and Europe. At the same time, U.S. external debt exceeded $30 trillion. And for some reason, the Americans are discussing a possible default of Russia. It's time for them to default. To overcome the negative consequences and new enrichment, the United States is creating a man-made global crisis. That is, they want to solve their problems at the expense of the rest of the world, by the way, primarily Europe. I mean, as an American who left because of these things, I agree with what he's saying. And moreover, they are happy to step in the direction of the abyss that the United States has dug for them. In this sense, much has changed since the Cold War. So again, the link to this is below. You can see that it's not ideal. And there's one last part I'd like to read through here. He says, in fact, there's nothing progressive there. In the United States, for example, many people say that you should sing and dance in math classes because solving problems and equations oppresses and discriminates against someone. We don't need such progress. The current situation proves the need to defend traditional Russian spiritual and moral values, reform the education and enlightenment system with the return of historically justified advantages of the national school. I am still convinced that the Soviet school of education has historically been the most advanced and progressive in the world. So doesn't seem like he's happy. And in the end, it is necessary to pay more attention to the development of logical thinking to form stable knowledge and the ability to make independent decisions and not just put crosses in tests, develop the applied application of fundamental sciences. And the reason that I'm highlighting that or felt it was worth reading is that we're seeing Joe Biden, Clinton's, Bush's, in my opinion, lie and fumble the football all the way through. And now it seems like it's escalating. So that is the news. Just wanted to pass that along. Again, the link to Ronan's fantastic article in the description field below. So go click there, read that. Worth going through the whole thing. And appreciate you being here. We'll look forward to getting Ronan on the show soon. And hope you're having a great day out there. And I'll see you again tomorrow.